In a small town, a teacher isn't just an employee. They are a pillar. They are the people we trust with the most vulnerable parts of our future. In Morgan City, Katherine Albarado wasn't just a teacher. She was an example. But on a Tuesday in late May 2022, that pillar didn't just crack. It shattered. The news didn't travel through a press release. It traveled to the panicked whispers of parents and the stunned silence of the faculty at Morgan City Junior High. Katherine Albarado, a woman who had spent years cultivating a reputation for excellence, was being led away in handcuffs. The initial reports were vague, but the charge was chilling. Enticement of a minor. To those who knew her, the headline felt like a glitch in reality. How does a Teacher of the Year nominee become a federal defendant? To understand the shockwave that sent through St. Mary Parish, you have to understand who Katherine Albarado was to this community. She was 29 years old, young, energetic, and highly effective. Colleagues describe her as dedicated. Students describe her as the cool teacher. In the ecosystem of a middle school, there's a specific type of power held by the teacher who gets it. The teacher who speaks the student's language. Albarado held that power. She was someone students felt they could talk to when they couldn't talk to their parents. It is the ultimate tool for a mentor and, as we would later learn, the ultimate weapon for a predator. The investigation began not with a dramatic confrontation, but with a tip. A thread was pulled. And as the St. Mary Parish Sheriff's Office began to unravel it, they realized the scope of the case exceeded their local jurisdiction. This wasn't just a lapse in judgment. It was a digital trail that led straight into the hands of the FBI. When the arrest finally happened, it wasn't just about one incident. It was about a pattern of behavior that had been festering under the nose of the school administration. Imagine the atmosphere in that faculty lounge the next morning. Imagine the parents checking their email to find a notification from the school board, written in the careful, sanitized language of legal liability. We are aware of the allegations. The employee has been placed on administrative leave. We are cooperating with authorities. But cooperating is a heavy word. While the school board was managing the PR crisis, federal investigators were already imaging Albarado's hard drives and syncing her cloud accounts. They were looking for the why, and what they found was a digital obsession that contradicted everything the community thought they knew about her. If you find these deep dives into the justice system and the psychology of power important, please consider subscribing and hitting the like button. It helps us keep these cases in the public eye and continue producing these long-form investigations. In criminal psychology, we often look for the mask of sanity. It's the version of a person that they project to the world to hide a deviance that they know is socially unacceptable. For Katherine Albarado, the mask was her teaching certificate. As we transition into the evidence discovered in May 2022, we have to ask, was this a crime of opportunity, or was it a calculated exploitation of a power dynamic? The federal indictment suggests the latter. It paints a picture of a woman who didn't just stumble into a mistake, but who meticulously built a private world with a student, a world where the rules of the classroom no longer applied. The fall of a role model is never just about the person in handcuffs. It's about the loss of safety for every student who sat in her rows. It's about the death of trust. And as the FBI would soon discover, the digital footprint she left behind was about to turn a local scandal into a federal landmark case. In the modern era of criminal investigation, the smoking gun is rarely a physical object. It's a sequence of packets sent through a router. It's a time-stamped log on a server in Virginia or California. For Katherine Albarado, her downfall wasn't a witness in a hallway. It was a digital ghost she left behind. When the FBI's Cybercrimes Task Force gained access to Albarado's devices, they didn't just find a few inappropriate messages. They found an archive. According to the federal indictment, investigators uncovered over 180 emails exchanged between Albarado and the minor involved. To put that in perspective, that is an average of 6 emails a day, every single day, for an entire month, not including real-time messaging apps or verbal interactions. This wasn't a conversation. It was a tether. In JCS-style analysis, we look at the frequency of contact as a metric for obsessive grooming. Most teachers send 0 emails to a student's private account after school hours. Albarado was sending dozens, but it wasn't just the quantity. It was the medium. Investigators noted that Albarado frequently used her school-issued accounts and devices to facilitate these communications. This suggests a sense of professional invincibility, a belief that her status as a trusted educator acted as a cloak, rendering her invisible to the monitoring systems designed to protect children. The content of these digital exchanges, as detailed in court documents, moved far beyond the boundaries of pedagogy. The indictment specifies that Albarado sent and received sexually explicit videos and photographs. In the digital realm, these files are more than just evidence. They are permanent records of intent. Federal prosecutors highlighted a specific window in mid-May. On this day, the digital trail turned physical. GPS data and cellular triangulation placed Albarado's device in proximity to the minor outside of school hours. This is where the defense's potential misunderstanding narrative usually falls apart. In federal enticement cases, the intent is established by the preceding digital grooming. If you send 100 emails discussing a meeting, and then your GPS places you at that meeting, the accidental nature of the encounter becomes legally impossible to maintain. The FBI doesn't just look at what you deleted, they look at the shadow data. Even if Albarado had wiped her phone, which records suggest she attempted to manage, the recipient's device, the cloud backups, and the ISP logs remained. In the eyes of the Department of Justice, she had written a 180-chapter confession before she was even a suspect. Cases involving the breach of public trust require a meticulous look at the facts. If you value this analytical, evidence-based approach to true crime, please hit the like button and share this video. Your engagement helps us continue to fund the research required for these deep dives. Why would a woman with a master's degree and a thriving career leave such an obvious trail? Psychologically, it often comes down to a compartmentalization failure. Albarado likely believed she was a protagonist in a private drama, one where her intelligence allowed her to outsmart the system. Every sent email was a dopamine hit, a reinforcement of a secret bond that she felt was untouchable. But in the federal justice system, there are no secrets, only data waiting to be subpoenaed. As the digital evidence mounted, the St. Mary Parish Sheriff's Office realized this was no longer a local matter. This was a violation of the PROTECT Act, a federal statute designed to stop the exploitation of children across state lines or via the internet. The digital trail had become a high-speed rail leading directly to a federal penitentiary. In the study of criminal psychology, particularly in cases involving educators, we often look for the gradual slide. It is rarely an overnight transformation from mentor to predator. Instead, it is a calculated erosion of professional boundaries, a process known as grooming. In the case of Katherine Albarado, this process didn't happen in the shadows of the street. It happened in the brightly lit hallways of Morgan City Junior High. To an outside observer, Albarado's behavior might have looked like extra-mile teaching. She was attentive, she was available, and she was invested. But grooming relies on the subversion of that very investment. It begins with special status. A student is chosen and made to feel that they're the only one who truly understands a teacher, or conversely, that the teacher is the only adult who truly understands them. Psychologically, this creates an isolated us-against-the-world dynamic. By the time the digital evidence surfaced in May 2022, the psychological groundwork had already been laid. Albarado had successfully transitioned from a position of authority to a position of confidant. Once a teacher crosses that line, the power imbalance doesn't disappear. It simply becomes a tool for manipulation. The student isn't just a student anymore. They are a co-conspirator in a secret that, if revealed, would destroy the person they've been taught to admire. The erosion of professional distance. The federal indictment paints a picture of a boundaryless relationship. In a professional setting, distance is protection, both for the student and the educator. Albarado systematically dismantled that distance. This wasn't just about the 180 emails. It was about the nature of the content. When a teacher shares personal vulnerabilities or asks a minor for emotional support, they're engaging in role reversal. This is a classic grooming technique. By making the victim feel responsible for the teacher's emotional well-being, the predator ensures silence. If the victim speaks up, they aren't just reporting crime. They are betraying a friend who needs them. It is a heavy burden for an adult to carry, let alone a junior high student. The school environment as a blind spot. One of the most disturbing aspects of the Albarado case is how the environment of a school can unintentionally facilitate this behavior. Schools are built on trust. We want our teachers to be engaged. We want them to build rapport. Because of this, red flag behaviors, like staying late with single student or constant private messaging, are often dismissed as high engagement. In Albarado's case, her reputation as a high achiever likely served as her primary shield. When a teacher is winning awards and showing results, the administration is less likely to scrutinize their methods. This halo effect allowed the grooming process to accelerate unchecked throughout the spring of 2022. It wasn't until the digital trail became too massive to ignore that the facade finally collapsed. Call to action. Understanding the mechanics of grooming is essential for protection of our communities. If you find these deep dives into the justice system important, please consider subscribing and hitting the like button. It helps us keep these cases in the public eye and provides a platform for education and prevention. When the handcuffs were finally placed on Katherine Albarado, the case took a turn that many in Morgan City didn't expect. This wasn't just a local school board matter, nor was it staying solely within the bounds of the Louisiana state court system. The FBI had entered the chat. The transition from state to federal charges is a significant escalation. In many cases of this nature, state charges might include indecent behavior with a juvenile. However, because Albarado utilized the internet, specifically email and digital messaging, to facilitate the crime, she fell under the jurisdiction of the federal government. The specific charge was enticement of a minor, a violation of Title 18, United States Code, Section 2422B. This isn't just a legal technicality. It is a different league of prosecution. Federal conviction rates are notoriously high, often exceeding 95%, and the resources the Department of Justice brings to bear are exhaustive. In the federal system, there is no parole. If a defendant is sentenced to 10 years, they will serve nearly that entire term. For Albarado, the stakes were no longer about her teaching license or her reputation in St. Mary Parish. They were about a mandatory minimum sentence that would define the next decade of her life. The law is particularly rigid when it comes to the exploitation of children via the internet. The 10-year mandatory minimum serves as a deterrent, but also reflects the gravity with which the federal government views the breach of trust by an educator. Federal prosecutors didn't have to prove that Albarado was a bad person in her daily life. They only had to prove that she used a facility of interstate commerce, the internet, to entice a minor to engage in sexual activity. With 180 emails and various digital media as evidence, the defense was left with very little room to maneuver. The law here is binary. If the communication existed and the intent was clear, the penalty is set. By moving the case to the federal level, the government sent a clear message. The Teacher of the Year status wasn't a mitigating factor. If anything, it was an aggravating one. The higher the pedestal, the harder the fall under the weight of federal law. On the day of sentencing, the courtroom in Lafayette, Louisiana, felt smaller than usual. The air was heavy with the weight of a concluded investigation and the presence of families whose lives had been irrevocably altered. For Katherine Albarado, the transition from the classroom to the defendant's table was complete. The Teacher of the Year was now simply a number in the federal system. The sentencing phase of a federal case is where the character of the defendant is often put on trial one last time. In Albarado's defense, there were likely mentions of her clean record, her professional achievements, and her contributions to the school. But in federal court, under the shadow of the PROTECT Act, these arguments often ring hollow against the clinical reality of digital evidence. In the federal justice system, sentencing is guided by a specific set of variables known as the Federal Sentencing Guidelines. These guidelines take into account the nature of the offense and the history of the defendant. However, because Albarado was charged with the enticement of a minor, she was subject to a statutory mandatory minimum of 10 years. The judge's role in these moments is to determine if the crime warrants more than the minimum. Prosecutors pointed to the 180 emails, the explicit nature of the media exchange, and the extreme breach of trust. When a teacher uses their position to bypass the natural defenses of a child, the law views it as a form of aggravated exploitation. Ultimately, Katherine Albarado was sentenced to 120 months, exactly 10 years, in federal prison. This was to be followed by a lifetime of supervised release and the mandatory requirement to register as a sex offender. In the eyes of the law, the debt for a month of digital grooming was a decade of liberty. The sentencing provided a legal conclusion, but it did little to heal the rift in Morgan City. For the victim, the conclusion of the court case is often just the beginning of a much longer journey of recovery. The psychological impact of being groomed by a trusted authority figure can manifest as a deep-seated distrust of institutions, a feeling that the very people meant to protect you are the ones most capable of harm. For the parents of Morgan City Junior High, the aftermath was marked by a sense of hypervigilance. The school district was forced to re-examine its policies on teacher-student communication. Questions were raised that had no easy answers. How did this happen in a public school? Why weren't the school servers flagging the high volume of emails? The Albarado case served as a grim wake-up call for school districts across Louisiana. It highlighted the reality that predators do not always look like the monsters we see in films. Sometimes they look like the most helpful, most awarded person in the building. As we close this investigation, we thank you for following along. These stories are difficult, but they are necessary to understand how our justice system functions and how we can better protect the next generation. If you haven't already, please subscribe and turn on notifications so you don't miss our next deep dive into the cases that changed our laws. As we look back at the timeline of May 2022, the case of Katherine Albarado stands as a cautionary tale about the digital age. It is a reminder that our digital footprints are permanent and that the mask of professional excellence cannot hide the data left behind. Albarado had everything to lose: a career, a reputation, and her freedom. Yet, the psychological pull of the grooming process and the illusion of digital privacy led her to trade it all for a series of emails and videos. She will spend the next decade in a federal cell, a stark contrast to the bright future her community once thought she had. In the end, this case isn't just about a teacher who broke the law. It is about the fragility of trust, the power of digital evidence, and the relentless, clinical nature of federal justice. In Morgan City, the name Katherine Albarado is no longer synonymous with education. It is a synonym for a pillar that fell and the lives that were caught in the rubble.